Welcome, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in to this inaugural Building Lifelong Athletes podcast. This is the first podcast of this series, and I'm super excited to start this. For those of you who don't know, my name is Jordan Renicky. I am currently a sports medicine physician and love all things health and wellness. And I wanted to kind of start this project to share my thoughts, opinions, and help me learn along the way. As I learn things, I want to share them with you. And really, I view this whole process as me having an accountability partner to learn things and then share what I'm learning to help you not only live a healthier life, but also implement them into your day-to-day life. So I'm super excited to get started. Today, we're going to start off with a general idea, general topic of, what constitutes good health? What are the key things that kind of add into making you a healthy person? So I kind of distilled it down to 9 main topics that I look at. If I think about it, it's kind of, we can name it the necessary 9 if we want to, or give it some name like that. But at the end of the day, I think these 9 topics, if you have these locked down, you're gonna be in really good shape. I'm a big believer of the 80-20 principle, meaning, 20% of your efforts yield 80% of your results. And it's very similar to this. If you lock in these 9 topics and 9 concepts, that's going to get you the vast majority of the benefits of health when we're talking about that. So we're going to work through those 9 topics today to kind of lay the foundation for everything else. These are kind of the big pillars of everything that I believe in terms of how to live a healthy life, how to live live to the fullest and live your best life and be the lifelong athlete that you want to be. And so pretty much everything I talk about from here on forward will be encompassed in some way, shape, or form in one of these pillars. Obviously, there's lots of nuance, and some of them are a much bigger deep dive than others. But for me, it's kind of like if I can talk about these 9 things, we're going to do a really good job of getting the best bang for our buck. So without any further ado, we'll get started here and we'll talk about number 1. Number 1 is eating a health promoting diet. Now, I intentionally left that vague because, as you know, it's a very hot subject here, nutrition. If you go online and just doom scroll Twitter at night, you'll find, everyone talking about this diet, that diet. This diet's better than that diet. This is better because of X, Y, and Z. And at the end of the day, it's great. I think there's definitely merit to talking about things. I don't think there's merit to yelling at people over the internet. I don't think that's accomplishing anything for anyone, but that's a whole nother podcast. But as we're talking about here, there's certain concepts and certain cores to all of these diets that we can extrapolate, we can pull out and use those to help us build that health promoting diet. And so when I say health promoting diet, what that means is it's kind of setting us up for success on the right track. And so obviously when we're eating a diet, there's things that you can restrict, whether that's macronutrients or total amount of calories or what have you. But at the end of the day, if you look at all these different diets, whether it's a low carbohydrate diet, a low fat diet, a keto diet, a calorie restricted diet, what have you, they all have certain things in common. And so the big things I want to talk about with a health promoting diet, the big things I think about is you should either be focusing on removing certain foods or macronutrients. That's kind of the thing. Diet quality is what you can also look at too, and then also time restricted feeding. And so these big 3 pillars, so meaning when I mean food or macronutrients, obviously some people have a preference, whether that is they enjoy eating lots of red meat, or they enjoy eating lots and lots of vegetables, or and don't want to have any animal products. It's okay. I still think there's ways to do things better, depending on what diet you have. But at the end of the day, when you're looking for a health promoting diet, there's 3 main knobs. It's either the time in which you're eating, so that's, intermittent fasting and kind of caloric restricting in that way. 2 is actually just counting calories. That can be a beneficial thing as well. And 3 is if you're not doing either one of those 2, it's kind of limiting your macros or your total different type of nutrient that you're taking. And at the end of the day, those are important things in terms of we have our macronutrients, we have our timing, we have our calories. But at the end of the day, you also should be checking on some biomarkers as well, kind of like looking at your labs and making sure that you're heading in the right direction. Because it does no good to be eating a perfect diet, but if all your numbers are getting worse, then it's probably not the perfect diet for you. And so when it comes to eating a health promoting diet, what do all these things have in common besides most of the time are just calorically restricting for when we're trying to lose weight? But it's just eating whole unprocessed foods. That's really kind of what it comes down to. Some people will argue grains versus no grains. At the end of the day, as long as we agree like Lucky Charms and Reese's Peanut Butter Cups, like that is probably not the ideal diet that we should consist on, although we can do that for a long amount of time because they're very adaptive. But at the end of the day, whole unprocessed foods, meaning like whole grains, vegetables, fruits, lean meats, a nut-based olive oils and fats, things like that are kind of our ideal way of looking at it. But at the end of the day, everyone's going to be different, and that's the thing. I want to just say this to everyone, like everyone's going to be different. Everyone's going to have a different philosophy. Everyone's going to respond differently to different foods. And so that's the thing. If you say that, hey, I love keto, it's my favorite thing in the world, but your LDL is sky high, then that might not be the right type of keto for you or the right diet for you, or if you say, hey, I really want to be a vegan or a vegetarian, and then your hair starts falling out and your performance is terrible, that might not be the right move for you too. So really, I'd say instead of having a dogmatic approach to diet, think about the overarching principles, right? Those big 3 principles we talk about in terms of when you're eating, what you're eating, or how much you're eating, those 3 things. And then below that, kind of the quality of the food that we're eating. And if you start there, I think it's a really, really good place to start. Going on then to our next one. So we talked about diet. I kind of think that's like the pillar. That's like the base of the pillar. But then on top of that, and right next to that, we also have physical activity. So getting enough physical activity is crucially important for everyone. I am so biased in how much I love exercise and activity. And so that's definitely gonna be something that, you'll see that time and time again. I'm super biased towards exercise, but I think if we can get enough physical activity, that's gonna do so many good things for us. So the current physical activity recommendations for the United States, depending on who you look, are about 150 minutes of moderate activity per week, or 75 minutes of vigorous activity. And so moderate and vigorous, what do those terms mean? Essentially, vigorous is when your heart rate is getting up a lot faster and you're breathing quite heavy, and moderate is where you're, okay, I can pretty much sustain this pace for a decent amount of time. So that's kind of how I think about that. There's certain things called METs, metabolic equivalents. It's kind of minutia, not really super important, but at the end of the day, you should be working hard during the week from that perspective. But then the big thing that I want to take home and tell everyone as well is when you do that, it's not just cardiovascular. They also recommend 2 days of resistance training per week. And so for me, I have a more resistance training bias in my philosophy and how I was growing up, how I enjoy it, how I like to train. So that's kind of how that works. But they do recommend in the general guidelines 2 days as well. So we should be hitting those 150 minutes of moderate or 75 of vigorous, and on top of that, have 2 days of lifting. And so I think that's like our bare minimum we should shoot for. Like if you're not hitting that, if you don't hit that, like start there. If you're not doing either 150 or lifting, start right there. For me, it's everyone's gonna be like, well, which one, what am I neglecting? Us lifters will tend to sometimes not want to do cardio and vice versa for my runner friends. And so you really know which one you're neglecting and kind of move from there based off of, where you think your weaknesses are. But if if we can get into that minimum baseline, that's like a starting spot. Can you exercise too much? That's a whole nother podcast question we can talk about, but for most intents and purposes, for most people, you probably can't. There's probably some extreme examples where you might be able to, but if you think about it, that's our floor. That baseline, we get that floor there, and then anything above that is gravy. It's going to be better. And I don't even have to necessarily talk about the benefits of exercise and what that does. It's literally limitless between helping you maintain body mass, helping your cholesterol, your blood pressure, your risk of cancer, literally like all-cause mortality, like your chance of dying, like literally everything you can think about, exercise helps you with. And so with those 2 pillars, like food and nutrition, like those are the first 2 that if you're not doing anything else, focus on these 2 and a lot of other things will fall into place as well. And it kind of goes hand in hand with our third topic, which is actually getting adequate sleep. I think as a society, we are chronically underslept. I think it kind of comes from the top where you see celebrities or people saying, I only need 4 hours of sleep. I'm a superhuman. They're lying. Pretty much, science will show that most people need 7 to 9 hours of sleep. And there's very, very, very few people who have the genotype that they can function on like 5 or less hours. They might say they're doing fine, but how many cups of coffee are they drinking? How many monsters are they crushing? Or just how many areas of their life are not going fantastically. It's essentially, you're going to have to sleep. Your body needs to get that. And if you don't, it just really impacts so many different things. Whether that's immune function, which I don't know if anybody's talked about immune function in the last 2.5 years or so, but it's pretty important. And so immune function, once again, blood pressure, cholesterol, overall mortality. Literally everything that I could say for physical activity and diet can be said for sleep as well. And so really those first 3 are like, check 1, check 2, check 3. And if one of those 3 is off, then go back and keep working until you get those, because these are like the top 3. It's like, man, if these are locked in, then everything else is going to be there. So, we'll talk more about sleep, and we'll talk about each one of these 9 topics individually at different points. But sleep is so important for everyone that we should be kind of at least giving ourselves a chance. If you're not sleeping, you're not giving yourself a chance to recover. You're not giving yourself a chance, to be at your best. So really, nutrition, exercise, sleep. If I just stopped right there, we'd probably take care of it. But I want to go a little deeper just so kind of have some more tangible things to touch on. Number 4. So we talked about our first 3. Number 4 is maintaining an appropriate body weight or body composition. I know this is kind of kind of treading into some sketchy areas here with the internet and whatnot, but I think the data is pretty convincing that you should have a healthy body composition and it's beneficial. When I talk about this, a lot of times people will say BMI, like, oh, but Jordan, BMI doesn't matter. It's not important. And I'm not saying we need to use BMI for everything. I'm not getting that at all. But if you look at BMI and how it was used, it's kind of a overarching tool. We can kind of look at the general population and say, where are they at? What's their threshold? And it does a decent job at that, actually. When you have someone who's in overweight or obese category based on BMI, for the general public, that works decently. Obviously, this demographic watching this is probably going to be a little bit more active. And so that might skew a little bit higher in the BMI with body mass or what have you. That's fine. I just want to say that having a healthy body composition, obviously if you're sitting in a 25 to 30 is kind of where the overweight is, and 30 above is obese. If you're sitting at a 27, 28, but you're ripped out of your mind, that's obviously a different concept. But honestly, that's a super, super small set of people. That's just not the general public. And so if you are that person, if you're like, Jordan, BMI doesn't work for me, that's fine. Then we can also add in waist circumference as well. And there's different cutoffs that we'll look for waist circumference to kind of dictate, hey, are we in a good area? And we can talk about that later. But at the end of the day, it does seem to matter. Obesity does tend to have, impacts on everybody. If you think about it, we used to think that adipose tissue or fat was metabolically inactive, that it just was there. We actually know that it's metabolically active, that it has, produces hormonal changes. It can lead to different things down the line. And so having and maintaining a healthy body weight is beneficial, not only from decreasing the amount of adverse effects you can get from the tissue itself, but also that we know later on the line, a lot of times increased adipose tissue or poor body composition can start to kind of snowball and lead to other things, to like metabolic syndrome leading down the line. And so I do think it's important. And once again, I kind of put this fourth down there because if you take care of those first three, this is probably going to take care of itself as well. And that's kind of like it is for most of the other things on the list. But I think it's worth mentioning because I do think it's important to at least consider that. And I don't think we should just be, throwing out BMI left and right and saying that's everything. But I think it's kind of important to kind of consider that as we go along. All right, next is one that hopefully not too many of y'all are dealing with, but don't use any tobacco products. That's our number 5 thing. If you're smoking, if you're dipping, if you're doing whatever, vaping, you should just stop. And I'm not here to preach or be on a high horse. There's just lots and lots of really good data that there's pretty much no good benefit to tobacco. That's not necessarily true. There's some links with that in colon cancer and decrease, but that's neither here nor there. That is a esoteric fact. But if you're using tobacco products, you should really stop. And I know that's like, well, Jordan, that's super easy. I'll just stop right now. I know that, man. I get that. It's super challenging. Whether you need pharmacologic therapy or group support or something, I just encourage you to do it. It's a really challenging thing to deal with, to stop tobacco of any kind. But man, that's like one of the biggest bangs we can get for our buck. Like if you just stop smoking, you stop dipping, you stop vaping, it is a huge benefit for you. And I know vaping is kind of relatively new. People are like, Jordan, is that safe? Is it not safe? I don't know. The way I think about it is like hot air going in your lungs, probably not good. Probably not good from any source. It's just not a good idea to have. It's going to damage the lung most likely. And we're starting to see some of that preliminary data come in as well. And so if you think about it, really getting rid of tobacco, that's a really, really low-hanging fruit. Easier said than done. I totally recognize that. I get that. But if we can do that, that would be a huge step forward in our health. Moving on, now we're getting into more of the kind of medical stuff, kind of the boring things. But the next one we're going to talk about is maintaining a normal blood pressure. Everyone knows about blood pressure. When you go to the doctor, they put the cuff on the arm and you sit there and you just hope it's a good number, or you don't even know what the number is. And you're just like, okay, cool. Looks good to me. But that's actually really, really important because our blood pressure is something that kind of can have some long-term issues. A high blood pressure here or there is nothing really to worry about. What we think about is these chronic time after time after time having high blood pressure can lead to some issues down the line. Issues with blood pressure can lead to issues with your heart. It can lead to heart attacks, can lead to strokes, can lead to all sorts of not fun stuff. And so it's really something we want to take care of. And I'm kind of a minimalist when it comes to tests, in terms of we should test this, we should test that. But you should get your blood pressure test. Pretty much regardless of how old you are, once a year, you should get your blood pressure test just to make sure that it's okay. Then it's not going, way, way high up there because it can lead to some issues longer term down the line. But that's kind of a really important thing. And, there's different guidelines. You go out in the medical world, there's all these different things. There's different organizations, we have different recommendations. I would say generally, if you're watching this, you consider yourself a lifelong athlete. You want to be active for life. You're healthy. You want to stay active. Shooting for less than 120/80 is a general good goal. I think the lower you go, the better, in terms of you can go 107 over 63. That's okay, as long as you're not just passing out and feeling lightheaded or anything like that. But the lower you go, probably better based on the data that I've seen. But at least getting for that 120 over 80, so your numbers are below 120 in the 1 teens and in the 70s for the diastolic. If you're hitting those numbers, I'm feeling generally pretty good about things, but obviously the lower, the better. And I think your doctor's never going to be mad if it's like, oh, your blood pressure's getting down there, unless you're having symptoms. Obviously, you're having symptoms, talk to your doc, hold up, we'll figure it out. But if you feel perfectly fine and you go to the doctor and you're sitting there like 100 over 60, no worries, man. That's awesome. That's great. That's fantastic. So blood pressure is another one that has some big consequences later down the line if we don't take care of it. And so it's another one that we have really good interventions for too. We know that diet and exercise does help, but sometimes we also need pharmacotherapy or some sort of medications. You'll kind of learn my approach behind medicines and whatnot. And I think there's definitely time and place for that. I know some people will say, you should never use medications. We should only be, using lifestyle interventions like sleep, exercise. I mean, like, once again, you're preaching to the choir. As the reason I said those three things are first, nutrition, exercise, sleep, like that's the foundation of everything. But what if that doesn't work? Like, what if we can't get there? What if, you're trying your hardest, you're doing hours and hours a week of exercising and eating perfect, and we still can't get there? What if you have bad genes? What if your family has high blood pressure and it just kind of comes with the territory? Do we just say, well, sorry, try harder? No, like, we use the tools we have at our exposure. And, when we have tools that we can use, we should use them. I'm not saying this is the first thing that we should do if you're high blood pressure. If you have it up and say, oh yeah, just take these pills. I think we talk about lifestyle, but man, to not use the tools we have, I think would be doing my patients an injustice. So I am doing that. I will do that. I will talk about medications judiciously. I use them judiciously as well. And I'm never going to try to just push that on people all the time. I know it's a very hot topic, but it is something that I will prescribe because sometimes, they can be very, very helpful for patients. And at the end of the day, for me, like, getting the target value to then lead to the target outcome, like, that's the most important thing to me. And how we get there, we can work on it together. But I really just want to have good outcomes. And sometimes that takes, taking medication. We've done 6 so far. Number 7 is going to be maintaining normal blood sugars. And so maintaining our blood sugars, essentially what this means is, everyone's talked about diabetes, right? Everyone's heard about diabetes, how it's growing in America. And it is. What essentially that is it's a problem with your body being able to regulate blood sugar. And everyone talks about insulin. Insulin's the hormone in your body that kind of brings sugar into the cells. And diabetes has an issue with kind of recognizing insulin, and you get essentially something called insulin resistance, where you're not as sensitive to that insulin, so it takes more and more insulin again to get the sugar back into your cells, and so you tend to have higher sugar levels in your blood. The reason that's an issue is these higher sugar, all the higher sugar in the blood can lead up to some accumulations around in the eyes, the heart, anywhere in your body that has blood vessels will have an issue with it. So the big things we worry about are heart attacks, strokes, can lead to kidney issues too. Like, a huge reason for kidney transplant is people who have what we call diabetic nephropathy or, kidney damage due to high blood sugars. And so it really is a devastating consequence that lasts years and years down the line. So we want to be able to find that early, identify it, fix that so we don't have the long-term sequelae of diabetes. But once again, critically important. A lot of times we find that all these things are linked: high blood pressure, diabetes, and the next one we're going to talk about cholesterol. A lot of times these are linked together, and that fixing them together is kind of the general approach we're going for. We're never going to be like in isolation, like, we'll just worry about your sugars today and we won't worry about your blood pressure. We worry about them all together. And so we'll kind of work on it. But getting our blood sugars on point is going to be helpful, no doubt. Number 8, we're talking about cholesterol. I hinted towards it. Getting your cholesterol in a regular range. This is also another one that's a huge can of worms on the internet. People are probably saying, Jordan, you're pretty brave for taking this on because here we go. Well, first of all, whatever, I'm not really on social media too much, so that's fine. But second of all, I just think based off of what I've seen, the evidence that I've looked at, I think that keeping an eye on these and understanding these is worthwhile to do. I know there's some people in the camp that LDL particle or LDL doesn't matter at all. And that it can be as high as you want as long as your other things are good, meaning your blood pressure, your sugars. And that is, I've seen that talk around there, but for me, it's just one of those things. I'm not really willing to bet on that yet. I'm not willing to say, okay, I'm very confident that's the case. And as long as these other things are fine, we can leave this and let it be. For me, it's just one of those things that I think we can have all of the above. I think we can have good control in blood pressure, good control in sugars, and good control in cholesterol. To me, it's like, I think hedging our bets towards improving our LDL and our cholesterol numbers, I think that's worth it to me personally. I think that if we can get all three of those under control, I would do that. If you prioritize something differently, that's okay. And I respect that opinion and I value that. But for me, I just look at it and it seems to be the evidence pointing towards, the higher the LDL and things like that we tend to have more issues. I think that's probably why I lean towards trying to keep that under control and, trying to keep within at least the general guidelines that's recommended by the medical communities out there. I think that's a good place to start. And we'll dive deeper into lipidology and cholesterol. It's a huge topic, lots and lots of information, and we'll learn more about that. But just generally starting with keeping them under control. If you have, if you have a generally good control, that's a good place to start. We might be able to optimize it better. There's some different tests and more specific tests we can do. But at the end of the day, I just don't want you to be running around with an LDL of like 600 and be like, oh, it's fine because everything else is fine. For me, I think I'd probably want to work on getting that down and improving that a little bit. But like I said, this is a big can of worms. I'm not ready to open the whole can right now, but I think encompassing the whole metabolic syndrome picture, I think it's helpful to control those. And then the last one here, number 9, we are going to talk about, it's kind of a catch-all for everything at the end of the day. It's kind of cheating a little bit, but it kind of falls on the same umbrella. It's like I want you to consider your mental, social, and spiritual well-being. So we've kind of talked about all these physical things, like checklist numbers, and lab values, and this and that. But at the end of the day, I put this at the end because if all these things are locked in, your diet's great, you're exercising like a madman, all your numbers look great, you're sleeping perfect, awesome, but you hate your life and you hate your community, what good is that? Like, it doesn't do any good. And so for me, having those first 8 things are fantastic and help lower our risk for lots and lots of issues. But like number 9, we also need to consider, because what good is it if you're locked in, have a perfect diet, but you're miserable? I think that's really, really important. So I think we're beings that, really have lots of benefits from having community, whether that is, an academic group, a medical group, a spiritual group, religious group, what have you. I think we benefit from that. And also, as we've seen the past couple of years, we've had a mental health epidemic here going on. And so taking care of your mental health is super, super important. And so I think a lot of times having these things locked in can be helpful towards that. But I do want to recognize that that can be an entirely separate issue. I don't want to be someone who just says, hey, you need to exercise harder or eat better, and then your mental, health will get better. Maybe that's true, but I'm not going to put that on you saying like, oh, you need to work out harder and that's why you're having that. I don't think that's the case. I think we've seen lots and lots of examples of that throughout the years. You probably know someone or you yourself has been affected by that. And so it's a very serious thing. But I just want to include that, like, if we're going to be ultimately healthy and happy, I think we need to include that. And we'll talk more about that. But this is just my general guideline, kind of my general necessary 9 of what it's going to take for you to be, healthy, truly healthy. And that being said, there's obviously more to this. This is not an all-encompassing list, but it kind of catches a big, a wide net kind of, at least to most things that we're going to talk about. I think if you get these 9 things locked in, you're going to be in really, really good shape. My goal is to be a lifelong athlete. My goal is for you to be a lifelong athlete. And so I want you to kind of learn with me and help use these things. And hopefully you've learned something from that. I would say from a takeaway perspective today, for a take-home thing, if one of these 9 things is not, where you want it to be, whether your blood pressure is not great or you're not exercising enough or your sleep is garbage, like, keep going back to this list. Like, literally, if you just worry about this list and keep working on it and you get it locked in, you're going to be so great. I know in social media today and the culture, it's very easy to go to the next sexy thing, whether it's, specific supplements or nutrients or this thing or that thing. I mean, those are great, but they're just really not, moving the needle much, where these are like big needle movers. Like, these are low hanging fruit. If we improve these, each individual one will have a big impact in and of itself. And you start tying those together, it's not going to be an additive effect. It's going to be, it's going to have a multiple effect is what it's going to come down to. So that's what I want to really just, encourage you to, hey, get these locked in and do that. So whether you're watching this or whether you're listening on your favorite podcast app, I really, really can't thank you enough for doing that. It means the world to me. I'm obsessed with YouTube and podcasts as well. So I know how crucial it is and how many options you have out there. And so that you're taking time, I really appreciate that. If you find this helpful, I really appreciate if you dropped a comment, left a review, hit a like, or subscribe. It just really lets you know that what kind of information you want to learn. So I hope this is the first of many, and thanks so much for tuning in. Appreciate you.